So my name is Hanan Schlesinger. Why don't I begin by telling you something from the Talmud, from Jewish literature 2,000 years ago. There's a statement there in the Talmud, I'm translating it to English, that says, these and those are the words of the living God. The reference is to a legal dispute between two rabbis 2,000 years ago, two rabbis representing different study halls, different ways of thinking, different schools. And after they argue, the passage says, for 3.5 years, a voice comes out of heaven and says, these and those are the words of the living God. And what that means apparently is that there could be two truths that are in opposition, but they're both true at the same time. That's possible. And that Talmudic statement informs a lot of who I am. When I tell you another Talmudic statement, it talks about the fact that the rabbis, this also goes back 2,000 years ago, the rabbis, the scholars, sit in different groups and in different study halls, and each comes up with a different interpretation of Judaism. They don't agree with each other on the most basic things of what Judaism is. And then the story says that a young student comes up and says, how can I learn Torah? Torah means Judaism. How can I learn Judaism under these circumstances? This rabbi says this, and this rabbi says the other thing. You can't get a hold on what the thing really is. What am I supposed to believe? And the Talmud answers and says, you should make your ear like a funnel and absorb the words of those who say yes and those who say no, those who say black and those who say white, those that say right and those that say wrong, those that say permitted and those that say forbidden. Absorb it all. And that also is part of my worldview, very deep part of my worldview. My impression is that truth, the truth of multiple truths, is one of the hardest things for modern people, and perhaps for any people, to accept, that there could be different ways of looking at something, and they're both valid, they're both legitimate, they're both true. So many people want to choose a side. For example, in sports, there's this strange phenomenon, you have to root for a team. You can't just be impartial. Where does that come from? People want to be partisan. They want to have someone who's their way, their side, their team. And if it's true in sports, I think it's kind of ridiculous. I hope I'm not offending anyone. I think it's ridiculous that people believe in their team so strongly. And the same thing you find in politics. Democrats and Republicans, you have to be in one team. You can't be on both teams. I don't understand it. And of course in religion, people who are partisans of one religion, they can't see any truth in the other, etc. It's in all of life. And I'm this strange animal that I'm trying to, I think I'm able to a certain degree to go beyond that and to really absorb that these and those are the words of the living God. So with that introduction, that Talmudic, rabbinic introduction, my story is a roller coaster. It goes from one truth to another truth. I'm going to tell you things that sound contradictory, and they are. So don't judge me based on the first 5 minutes, or the first 10 minutes. Things that I say are going to rattle you from one end to the other. I introduce myself by emphasizing 4 labels that are correctly put upon me. I'm a Jew, I'm a rabbi, I'm a Zionist, and I'm a settler. And I want to take 2 minutes to explain each of those before I tell you my story. So when I know myself and identify myself as a Jew, the first thing that has to be said is that from the Jewish self-understanding, Jews are not merely members of a faith community, not a religion. Also a religion, but not primarily a religion. The Jews, we call ourselves the Jewish people. We're a people. It's not exactly a nation, but it's pretty similar. It's not exactly an ethnic group. It's not exactly a culture. It's all those things. What the Jews are, we're a family. We're a family going back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the book of Genesis, chapter 12, and the whole rest of the book of Genesis, and the whole rest of the Bible. It's the story of a family that expanded into a clan and then became a people, became a nation. And just like any nation on the face of the earth, from the very outset, this nation was born on a piece of real estate in the land of Canaan. Right? Everyone knows the phrase land of Canaan from the book of Genesis and the rest of the books of the Bible. The Jewish family settled the land of Canaan in chapter 12 of Genesis at God's behest. And we have developed and formed on this land. It's always been a central part of our consciousness. And furthermore, when I say I'm a Jew, you have to keep in mind something that we Jews say on the holiday of Passover, which is coming in just under 2 weeks. We sit down on the holiday of Passover at night. It's what's called the Passover Seder. And we have a long ceremony that goes on a number of hours with the family. At one point we say the following, I'll translate into English. In every generation, one must see himself as if he personally went out of Egypt. Going back to the book of Exodus, when the Israelites left Egypt, slavery to freedom, on the holiday of Passover, we don't really celebrate the Exodus from slavery to freedom, the Exodus from Egypt. We don't merely celebrate and commemorate it, we relive it. We try to experience it. We try to see ourselves as if we were there because we were there. Because the Jewish consciousness is not, to take my case, someone who was born 57 years ago and is going to die another day, another 30 years. I'm eternal. I'm eternal because I'm part of the Jewish people. I'm not just part of the Jewish people, I am the Jewish people. The consciousness that goes back to Abraham and continues until the days of the Messiah, that's who I am. I'm a link in a chain, and every other link in the chain is part of who I am. And it's true for Passover, that we see ourselves as having gone through the stages of Jewish history, but it's true for all the Jewish holidays, it's true for all of the way stations in Jewish history. It's part of who we are. We're part of a large vertical and horizontal family of being, an expanded consciousness. So that when I say I'm a Jew, that's a little bit of what I mean. When I say I'm a rabbi, that's easier. It simply means that I've spent my whole life, and I'll continue to spend my whole life teaching Jewish texts and struggling with the meaning of Jewish texts. So when I say I'm a rabbi, it simply means that I'm completely devoted to the texts of the Jewish people, to the meaning of the Jewish people, and to the continuation of the Jewish people. When I say that I'm a Zionist, I mean that I'm one of those Jews who's convinced that at this point in history, the 20th century and the 21st century, the time has come for the Jewish people to reconsummate our connection to this age-old land. We were out of the land for 2,000 years, and the circumstances of history as we read it told us that God has it in the cards for us to come back. And so we began coming back. Zionism is the return of the Jewish people to its land and the revitalization of the Jewish people as a sovereign nation. That's what I mean when I say I'm a Zionist. And when I say that I'm a settler, I mean that I'm one of those Zionists who says to himself that if the time has come for the Jewish people to reconsummate our connection to the land, then I want to do it in the very, very center, the epicenter of the land where all of Jewish history began, which is in these hills. I'll show you the map. I tried to find as non-political map as I can, but we are right between Bethlehem and Hebron now. We're on the central mountain range. It goes from north to south. This central mountain range is where Abraham entered the land. It's where Isaac and Jacob, it's where all of Jewish history took place. And if I'm going to be here reconsummating the Jewish people's connection to land, then let's do it where Abraham walked, and where Isaac walked, and where all of the Bible took place. You know, the Bible didn't take place in Tel Aviv, didn't take place in Ashdod, didn't take place in Haifa. Those are nice places. And from the biblical point of view, they're part of the land of Israel, they're part of the land of Canaan, but that's not where most of Jewish history took place. It took place in these hills. So that's my introduction to myself as a Jew and a rabbi and a Zionist and a settler. And now I want to just flesh that out. So I mentioned already chapter 12 of Genesis. God says to Abraham, go forth from your land and go to the land that I will show you. And God showed him this land. Abraham entered the land in the area of Nablus, in Shechem, in Hebrew. And most of his life he spent going on the north-south axis, down from Nablus through Shiloh, not on the map, through Beit El, through the area that's now called Jerusalem. Bethlehem, of course, is mentioned in the book of Genesis. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob walked through there, down to Hebron and down to Beersheba. That's where they spent their lives. When Abraham went to the area that's called Gaza, Gerar, it's called leaving the land. And certainly when he went to Egypt, in the book of Genesis, it's called leaving the land. I want to explain how meaningful and powerful it is for a Jew in this century to live in the land, on the land where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob walked. Very near here, there's a dirt path that we call the Way of the Patriarchs. We call it the Way of the Patriarchs. It's a north-south road that we found Roman milestones on it from 2,000 years ago. It was the Roman north-south road in the time of the Romans 2,000 years ago. And if it was the Roman road 2,000 years ago, in those days, roads didn't change too quickly. It was probably the Canaanite road 3,000 years ago. And if it was the Canaanite road 3,000 years ago, then it's the road that Abraham walked upon when God called and told him to come to this land and traverse it, the breadth and the width of it. For a Jew who's connected to the Bible, and I'm a Jew who's connected to the Bible, to walk in the footsteps of Abraham is really powerful. Just to remind you that in the middle of the book of Genesis, we have the story that in Hebrew we call the Akedah, the binding of Yitzhak, the binding of Isaac, when God commanded Abraham to take his son, his only son, and put him on an altar in the place that I will show you. At that time, Abraham was in Beersheba, in the town of Beersheba, and God said, walk for 3 days to the mountain. Abraham walked for 3 days, and after 3 days he was shown the mountain. In Jewish tradition, that's Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, which means that if Abraham was walking 3 days from Beersheba to Jerusalem, he walked through my backyard. He walked right through here. And we live that every day. And it's not just Abraham, it's not just Isaac, it's not just Jacob. Jewish history happened right here. You go fast forward from the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, you go to the book of Joshua, where 40 years in the desert, the Israelites left Egypt. 40 years wandering the desert, they entered the land. When they entered the land in the time of Joshua, in the book of Joshua, they entered the land, of course, going over the Jordan River. At Jericho is where they entered the land, and then they began to spread out. It took hundreds of years for them to spread out to the coast. So in the time of Joshua and the ensuing generations, they were right here. They were right here. They didn't reach the coast. In other words, Jewish settlement in the land going back 2,800 years ago began in what we today call, and I'll give you 8 different names, what we call it today. We call it Judah and Samaria. We call it Palestine. We call it Palestinian territory. We call it occupied territory. We call it liberated territory. We call it Greater Israel. We call it the West Bank. It's all the same, and any name I would choose or any prejudices what political party I'm part of. But this land, I'll call it Judah and Samaria. That's what my tradition calls it. Samaria is north of Jerusalem and south of Jerusalem is Judah. That's this land that's today the West Bank in gray. That's where the 12 tribes of Jacob settled in the time of Joshua. And that's where the center of Jewish settlement was. And furthermore, why do we call it Judah and Samaria? Judah is called Judah because the central tribe of the 12 tribes, the leadership tribe, Judah, were given this part of land as an inheritance. The other 12 tribes were around here. Judah was here. So notice the central leadership tribe of Judah was right here, right where we are right now. And Judah is where King David came from. And King David established the center of his monarchy, the capital. The first 7 years was in Hebron, last 33 years was in Jerusalem. And since then, since he moved the center of his kingdom to Jerusalem, Jerusalem has been the capital of the Jewish people for all time. It was the administrative center, and it was the spiritual center. That's where the temple was built, the Holy Temple, the first temple, the second temple. It's here that Jewish history took place. Let me fast forward to Second Temple times. I'm talking about 2,300 years ago, up to 2,000 years ago. Second Temple times, the temple was standing in Jerusalem. Jewish pilgrims who didn't live in the land, but let's say lived in Babylonia or in Egypt or places even further, they would come 3 times a year on the pilgrimage festivals, as is mentioned in the book of Exodus, in the book of Leviticus, and in the book of Deuteronomy, also in Numbers. 3 times a year in the pilgrimage festivals, streaming from around the diaspora to the land of Israel, to Jerusalem, to worship on the holidays of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot in the temple. And of course, the pilgrims coming from the south would move through this area, would again walk through my backyard. And right here, a 10-minute walk from where you're sitting right now on the Way of the Patriarchs, the dirt road I mentioned, you could find there 2 ancient mikvaot. Mikvah is the singular. The word means ritual bath. Mikvaot is the plural. A ritual bath is a bath carved out of stone with stairs going down and stairs going up where the rainwater would collect. And that's where the Jews purified themselves by immersing themselves in living water on their way to the temple in Jerusalem. I don't know when the last time most of you read the book of Leviticus, but you could read there about the laws of worshiping God in purity and have to immerse yourself in a pool of living water before entering the temple in Jerusalem. So pilgrims from around the world would walk through this area, and it's only a 6 or 7 hour donkey ride from here to Jerusalem. So if they were traveling, they got here, they knew another 6 hours in Jerusalem, they'd immerse themselves in the water here on their way to the Holy Temple to worship the God of dinner. It's right here. For myself and for my neighbors, for my students and for my friends, to know that we're living where the Bible was created. We're living where the Jewish people developed and grew, and we're back. That's unbelievably powerful for us. I want to read to you a prophecy from the book of Zechariah. I know that Americans call it the book of Zechariah. I always get that mixed up. It's chapter 8. Thus said the Lord of hosts, there shall yet be old men and women in the squares of Jerusalem, each with staff in hand because of their great age. And the squares of the city shall be crowded with boys and girls playing in the squares. Thus said the Lord of hosts, though it will seem impossible to the remnant of this people in those days, shall it also be impossible to me, declares the Lord of hosts. So what is this prophecy? It's a prophecy that someday there'll be little boys and little girls, Jewish boys and girls. There'll be old men and women, Jewish men and women, living out their lives from the beginning to the end in the tranquil squares and streets of the city of Jerusalem. And the prophet says, you think it's impossible? God could do the impossible. And then we ask ourselves, what do you mean, impossible? What's so stupendous? What's so impossible about a prophecy that says that someday Jews will live in Jerusalem? Jews live in Sydney, Jews live in London, Jews live in New York, Jews live in Colorado. Why can't they live in Jerusalem? Why living in Jerusalem is an impossible prophecy? And the answer is, in order to understand, you have to see the context. The present, the past, the future. When this was spoken, this is about 540 before the Common Era. 535 before the Common Era. Zechariah is with the exiles coming back from Babylon to Judah. After 70 long years of exile in Babylonia, after the destruction of the first temple in 586 before the Common Era. And he's telling them someday there'll be normal life in the city of Jerusalem. And you think it's impossible? God could do it. Why do you think it's impossible? Because then the city was completely desolate. Only rocks and stones. There were jackals darting in and out of the huge stone blocks that used to be the temple, that used to be the city wall. There was nothing there. And so when God says to the prophet, someday Jews will re-inhabit the city, you say, what? How could that be? There's nothing left there. Not only nothing left there, but there's no one left to go back. Because the Jews were 70 years in Babylonian exile. And the kids are growing up in exile, outside of their homeland. They're not learning Hebrew anymore. They're going to Babylonian discotheques and Babylonian schools. They're not going to Hebrew school. They're not learning the language or the culture or the religion. There's no one to go back. There's no place to go back to. The prophet says they'll go back. There will be again Jewish life in the streets and squares of Jerusalem. You know what had happened? After 70 years of exile, that prophecy took place. And Zechariah the prophet was one of those who merited to go back to the land from Babylonia with 42,000 other exiles streaming home. And I say to myself the following. If the return of those exiles in about 530 of before the Common Era was a miracle, was impossible come true, then what do I say to myself in the 20th and 21st centuries when the Jews have again come back? And this time we've come back not after a 70-year exile, but after a 2,000-year exile. And we've come back not 42,000, but over 6 million. And we've come back reconstituting a nation in the same land we were 2,000 years ago, with the same language, the same Bible, the same culture. It's amazing. It's stupendous. I just summarized to you the meaning of my whole life. That I have merited in my generation after 2,000 years of exile. And I was there with my forefathers when we were thrown out of here in the year 70 of the Common Era by the Romans. And I was there in Egypt with Maimonides in the year 11,000 when he was persecuted by the Muslims. And I was there in Spain in 1492 when we were exiled by Ferdinand and Isabel and then the Inquisition. I was there in the Chmielnicki massacres in 1600s in Poland. I was there in the Holocaust. And now I'm back. That's stupendous. That explains why, when I was 18 years old, I left my house, my family in Long Island, and just with 2 suitcases came to make Aliyah. You say make Aliyah means go up to the land and become part of that unbelievable dream come true of the Jewish people returning to its ancient homeland. Anyone ever been to the UN Plaza in Suffern, New York? Wow. Well, I haven't. But I've been told that there's a big plaza there, and around the perimeter, you have the flags of all the nations. Is that true? Yeah. Is it true? They're still there. And this teacher of mine said, you look there at the flags in the UN Plaza, and you see the flag of the US, representing a nation of 200 years old. You see the flag of Britain, representing a nation going back hundreds and hundreds of years. You see the flag of China, representing a nation in its land for 3,000 years. But there's nothing in the annals of history like the nation represented by the blue and white flag of the State of Israel. Because this is a flag that represents a nation that's on the same land it was born 3,000 years ago, but it's been outside of the land longer than it's been on the land. We were here for 1,000 years. Until 2,000 years ago we were exiled by the Romans. And for 2,000 years we've been gone. And now we're back on the same land we were born on, speaking the same language, the same culture, the same religion, the same Bible, rebuilding our consciousness, rebuilding our sense of self after all those years. It's an unbelievable miracle. The prophet Ezekiel presents us a vision, a prophecy called the prophecy of the dry bones. Perhaps you've heard of it. And in the prophecy of the dry bones, the prophet says that you Jewish people, you think you're dry bones. You think you're all dried up. You think there's no hope for the future. But I will bring you back to the land, and I will resuscitate you. I will resurrect you as a nation upon your land. And if you don't believe it, says God to the prophet, I'll show it to you. And then God says to the prophet, look around you, and the prophet sees in his vision a valley of dry bones, of graves. And then that graveyard, the graves start to open up in his vision, and he sees the bones come together, bone to bone, sinew to sinew, and suddenly you have these bodies that are arisen from the grave. And then they begin to walk and talk and breathe. That's his vision. And God says to the prophet, you see those bones who become bodies? They're symbolic of the Jewish people who think they're dry bones. But they will live again. And they'll come back to the land again. That was a metaphor. That was a vision. But in my day, the Jewish people were literally dry bones. In 1941 and 1942, and 1943 and 44 and 45, my people were literally dry bones. We were merely bones. We were ashes. We were smoke coming out of the crematoria of Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. We were cakes of soap. We were clouds in the sky. We were ashes in the crematoria. And if you would have asked me in 1941 and 1945, will those dry bones live? Will those cakes of soap ever arise? I would have said, no, the Jewish people are finished. There's no hope. And within 3 years, those bones had arisen and reconstituted the nation state that had been here 2,000 years ago. One of those dry bones is talking to you right now. And he's alive and he's well. And he is unbelievably moved by the very fact that I'm alive in this land. And when I say me, it's not an individual. It's a collective, it's a people. That narrative, that self-understanding from the Bible to today is what is behind the Jewish state, is what's behind the state of Israel. Whether the people that you meet in the street, whether they're religious Jews or secular Jews, whether they believe or whether they're not, whether they live in Tel Aviv or they live here, The story of the Bible is what brought them here. Many of them don't know that. But when we started coming back to this land in about 1880, I've been streaming here since, what motivated us, what powered us, was the memory that we were once here. And this is the only place in the world where we can reconstitute our nation. When all the nations of the world didn't want us anymore, the lead up to the Holocaust, all the doors closed, there was one place we knew that will give us the vitality and the sense of reality that will allow us the energy to recreate what we were so many years ago. We dreamed of it for 2,000 years of exile. We hoped for it, we prayed, we read the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Zechariah and all the others, and we made it come true. With the help of God, we made it come true. From my perspective, it's an unbelievable miracle that my forefathers didn't merit to experience, and I merited, and I have to live up to that legacy. And I believe that the power and the vitality and the truth of that narrative that I just told you has blinded me and blinded my co-religionists and blinded 5 million Israelis to another truth that's also powerful and also meaningful and also human. And that other truth is the Palestinian truth. It's absolutely clear to me that 100 years ago, when my forefathers began streaming to this land from Europe and from the four corners of the earth to reconstitute our nation, I'm convinced that we didn't see that there was someone else here before us. We just didn't see it. How do I know they didn't see it? Because I myself didn't see it until a year and a month ago. It's now a year and a month and a half. We are so focused on saving our skin from the Nazis and from the pogroms and from all of the anti-Semitism around the world. We're so focused on building our nation. We're so focused on making the pages of the Bible come alive. We're so focused on seeing the prophecies of the prophets come alive before our eyes. And we're so enamored, intoxicated by our success in doing so. We're so amazed that we're still alive after all those years of exile and pain and suffering and hope, that we just don't see that the fulfillment of our dream is causing a catastrophe to another nation. We just don't see it. And then the question becomes, how do you live two truths at the same time? How do you maintain my connection and fidelity to the Bible, to Judaism, to the Jewish people, to the future, to my grandchild, to our hope that we'll continue to live as an independent nation of the Bible in this land? How do you square that truth and that need with another truth of another people that has just as much right to live and flourish as we do, and has a claim on the same land, the same piece of land, not a different piece of land, the same piece of land? And now I want to tell you the story of how I came to this sense of these two truths that are struggling with each other, how I woke up from my blindness of not seeing the Palestinians. So I'm sitting in my office one day, this is only now a year and 2 months ago, and I get an email from a Protestant pastor in Reston, Virginia. And he tells me that he comes to the Holy Land twice a year. He meets Palestinians, he meets Israelis, specifically settlers in Judah, right around here, and he introduces them to each other. And his mission in his life is to make peace between neighbors. And he said he wants to meet me. He heard that I was interested in expanding my horizons. So we said that when he comes, we're going to meet. He sat in that chair, and I sat in the chair you're sitting in. And we just told our stories. He told me who he was, and we talked for 2 or 3 hours. And he said, I want to invite you to a little get-together. He said, next Thursday at 4 in the afternoon, there's a little piece of Palestinian farmland not too far from here. There's a little get-together of Jews and Palestinians, Israelis and Palestinians. I said, I'd be happy to come. So on that Thursday, I walked out my front door, and I told my wife where I was going. And of course she said, don't go, it's dangerous. And I went anyway. And I walked 20 minutes through the Palestinian vineyards and fields until I got to a piece of land owned by the Awad family from Beit Umar. A piece of land that's 20-minute walk from my house. And on this piece of land, I saw a little tent and 20 Israelis and 20 Palestinians talking to each other. Now, Palestinian Israelis never talk to each other, but here they were talking to each other. So I walk up to this guy. It was his wife first, and she's dressed in brown from head to toe, everything covered except her face. I just walked up and I said hello, and I told her who I was. We started to talk. One of the first things we said after the weather was, don't remember which one of us said it first, I can't believe I'm talking to you. And the other response, I can't believe I'm talking to you. We don't talk to each other. And after a few minutes, her husband came over, and we talked more. They spoke English, not Hebrew. And he says he lives in Beit Umar with his wife and children. And I tell him that I used to live in Karmei Tzur. Karmei Tzur is a settlement to the south of here, 7 kilometers to the south of here. Very small settlement. There were 21 families in those days. This was 30 years ago. And that's right next to Beit Umar. So I said kind of, cynically, we were neighbors. So he gets out his smartphone, and for a second, I couldn't believe that Palestinians have smartphones. And he goes to Google Maps, and I, at that point, didn't know what Google Maps were. He shows me on his phone where he lives in Beit Umar, and it's right on the border of Karmei Tzur, because we were really neighbors 30 years ago. And of course, there was a large, high fence separating us. And I remembered at that very moment that 30 years ago, we could hear, when the wind was blowing in the right direction in the evening, we could hear Palestinians talking in their homes from across the valley, and through the fence, can hear them in my backyard. And now I was talking to those people. But for me, those people don't exist. They're like phantoms. I remember that then, when we used to live there, we had little kids in the house, infants, and sometimes parents get angry at their children. When my wife get angry at the kids and want to curse them, she would say, go to Beit Umar. It means like go to hell. Go to the dark side of the moon. And now I'm talking to someone from hell. The people that I only knew was throwing rocks at us and wanting to get rid of us, suddenly I'm talking to them. And they're human beings. And then their son walked over. A 17-year-old young man who was wearing a windbreaker that said it's Seeds of Peace. Seeds of Peace is a camp that takes Palestinian Israeli kids out of the conflict zone in the summers to Maine, where they learn about conflict resolution and hearing the story of the other. And I couldn't believe that a Palestinian from Beit Umar has been to a camp that has the word peace in it. The people in Beit Umar, they're not interested in peace. They only throw rocks at us. They only want to get rid of us. And I suddenly realized I was wrong. My understanding of them was just not a reflection of reality. And at a certain point in the conversation, the guy said to me, his name is Jamal, he's now a good friend of mine. Jamal says to me, when my little kids see someone with a kippah like yours, they start to cry. And I said to him, what are you talking about? Why should you cry when you see someone with a kippah? So he said that, he didn't understand why I didn't understand. So he said, well, people with kippot have long beards. Okay, so what are you afraid of? And they carry guns and they kill our kids. Excuse me? That's what he said to me. And it took me a few seconds until the light bulb went off and I suddenly realized what he was talking about. Because I know that when my family or my neighbors or our youth group, when we want to go for a walk in the fields to feel the land, the dirt of the land of Israel under our feet and walk where Avraham walked, well, it's dangerous out there. There's Palestinians, there's Arabs who want to kill us. Of course we walk around with guns. And then I suddenly realized how it looks to his kids when I walk around in the fields with my wife and my children, each of us with a gun slung across our shoulder. And I suddenly realized why he's afraid of me. But I said to him, how could you tell me that you're afraid of me? I'm afraid of you. And we kind of looked at each other with this sad look. We're all afraid of each other. We're all afraid of each other. Look at this. We live very close to each other. There's 22 Israeli settlements in this area. And there's lots and lots of Palestinian villages, some of them cities, some of them towns, Beit Lechem, Hebron, Beit Umar, Nachalim, there's Jabba. We live so close to each other, but we're so far from each other. There's no contact. We pass each other on the roads driving, and you look at the other guy with different license plates and with different dresses different than you, but you never talk to the people, you don't know who they are, because we live in different towns and cities, speak different languages, have different religions, which means different house of worship, different school systems, different media. The newspapers I read are not the newspapers they read. And the radio I hear is not the radio they hear. And the television that I see is not the television that they see. Which means if you have two different sets of mass media, bringing reality to your two different communities, it means you live in two different worlds, because you learn about different things happen in your worlds. The media is the world you live in. We live in different worlds. The people who collect my garbage don't collect their garbage. My municipality is not their municipality. The schools my kids go to is not the schools they go to. The afternoon clubs are not nothing. The malls and the stores, nothing is the same. We live in two different worlds. And when you live in two different worlds, of necessity, you're going to be suspicious of the other. You're going to have stereotypes. And there's going to be mistrust. And in our situation, which each side sees the others trying to kill it, and each side reads in its newspapers about the other side trying to kill it, to kill them, then of course you're going to hate. Of course you're going to hate. You don't need a specific curriculum in your schools to teach hate. Reality teaches hate around here. Because we're so close together, but know nothing of the other. And the only contact we have is Israeli soldiers. I experience Palestinian when I'm a soldier in the reserve duty, and they experience me as an occupier. Or I experience Palestinians who come to my house to do menial labor, and they experience me as the Lord. But we never, ever, ever talk to each other as equals. Never. And at that event I'm describing, back in January 2014, was the first time in my life, after living here since 1980, first time in my life I ever talked to Palestinians as equals. One more story about how everyone's full of fear here. You just entered Alone through the main gate with the bus. That's where you picked me up. Right near that main gate, there's a group of 4 or 5 Palestinian homes. It's not a village, it's a clan. And one day, during this past summer, one of the Palestinian families living there put up a sign that said in Hebrew, Mishtelet HaShalom, which means the peace nursery. Nursery in the sense of a place for potted plants and gardening utensils. It was in Hebrew because he wanted customers from the Jews here. And I said to my wife, we needed a plant. You see, my wife loves plants, and so do I. We need a certain plant for one of the tables over there. So I said to her, why don't you go to the new nursery? And a strange thing happened. She did what I suggested. And it was strange, not because I suggested it merely, because Jews don't go into Palestinian places. The nursery closed down after a few weeks. I'm sure no one went. But my wife went. And she came back after half an hour, and she told me the following story. She said, I took the car to the gate, parked it there, walked into the nursery. There was a Palestinian kid at the entrance nursery who greeted me, and his Hebrew wasn't so well, so it was flustering for both of us. And then the owner came over, and his Hebrew was better. He took me into the nursery, she said. And then she said, I explained what I needed, and he said, we have it in the hothouse, and he took me deep into the hothouse. Just he and I. And we walked in, we got the plant they needed, and we walked out together. As we were walking out of the hothouse, we passed by a group of Palestinians sitting and eating and smoking and speaking Arabic together. Then I went to the cash register, my wife said, and paid for the plant. Got in the car, came back, here it is. And it was the most frightening experience of my life. I barely got out of there alive, and I'll never go back again. What do I say? Fright is subjective. It was a frightening experience. But all it was a nursery. And it was not expensive, and it was convenient. We got exactly what we wanted. But my wife had a frightening experience. And she's so sorry she put herself in the lion's den. She said she'll never go back again. And my wife is not alone. That's the way we live. That's the way we live. And just think of what that does to us morally, what it does to us religiously, what it does to our children. And I think that it's pretty similar on both sides. We live in fear. And for the first time in my life, like I said, a year and a month and a half ago, on the land of Ali Abu Awad, we had this kumzitz, we had this get together, and I talked to Palestinians for the first time, and that changed my life. And after we talked and ate together, we sat in a circle as the sun was going down. There was perhaps 15 people left from the side, and a representative one Palestinian, one Israeli, talked for 20 minutes and just told who they are. And Ali began talking. And it was the first time in my life I heard a Palestinian give a speech. Talk. Like a human being, like an intellectual, like a leader. And he talked about his life growing up in Beit Umar. Right here, 5-minute drive. And he talked about the difficulties of life under occupation. And he talked about soldiers coming into his house and searching. He talked about checkpoints. He talked about his brother being killed by soldiers. He talked about him being wounded by settlers. And he talked without rancor and without hate. He didn't mean to attack me, but I felt attacked. Every word he spoke was offensive to me because it was a narrative. It was a way of organizing reality that was so different than what I knew. It's like he was taking the building blocks of history that I knew, 1917, 1948, 1967, Intifada, and taking those building blocks and building them into a narrative so different, the narrative that I knew to be true. So it was offensive and I felt attacked. But I didn't hear him say anything that was false, that I could identify as a lie. And I walked out of there really troubled. He used this word occupation. I never heard that word in my life before. I mean, I read in the newspapers, but I don't experience myself as an occupier. I live in my land. And he's suddenly telling me that he wasn't telling me that I did anything wrong to him, but he was describing a situation of him living under occupation. And I remembered when I was a soldier 20 years ago and the things that I was told to do to the Palestinians around here. And it came flooding back to me. I participated in midnight arrests when the security services told me to get in my Jeep and drive to this house, and guards, they arrested someone in the middle of the night and took him out of the house, a 17-year-old kid in his underwear with his mother wailing and his little brothers and sisters crying. I remember that. I had repressed it. So I went home and I was thinking, and I started to read, and I started to look at all these leftist websites I'd never be caught dead reading. and suddenly I realized that there's some truth in what they're describing what it's like for Palestinians to live under occupation, what it's like to have no rights and no possibility of building and not enough water, not enough electricity. And I began to see that there's truth in that. And I went back to Ali and I started talking to him more and more. And he introduced me to other Palestinians. And within 3 months, my world started falling out of my stomach. I was nauseous for many days because my worldview was being turned topsy-turvy. It was very difficult, extremely difficult. I didn't know who I was or what I believed. So I read more and I talked, and in the end I found myself with a new best friend named Ali Abu Awad, who has become my teacher and my mentor, and a really good friend. And I met lots of other Jews and Palestinians who want to change things. And I found myself in a new career. I became one of the founders of an organization called Roots, in Hebrew Shorashim, in Arabic Judur. And we call ourselves the Palestinian Israeli Initiative, grassroots initiative for understanding, nonviolence, and reconciliation. And what we do, I guess we founded this back in March, now it's exactly a year. What we do is to help people from both sides experience the other. Not to have arguments with the other, to listen to the other. And to listen is really hard, because you have to hold yourself back from arguing. You just have to listen. I have to listen to them and they have to listen to me. Look at the terms I talk in, them and us. That's the way we live around here. But I'm one of the few people I know that has thems that are part of us, part of my heart, part of my soul. We bring people together to listen to each other. We have more of those family gatherings like the one that changed my life. And we have a photography workshop for Palestinian Israeli kids that meets once a week. We had a summer camp for kids in the summer during the height of the Gaza war. We have interfaith dialogue groups. We have a lot of other things going on. We speak in homes and in schools around the country. My Palestinian partner and another Israeli, for people to meet a Palestinian for the first time. We have groups from around the world who come to hear a Palestinian and an Israeli settler tell their stories, which you just heard. We have gap. Israel has a phenomenon of a gap year program like you're on. We have had at this point over 1,000 Israeli students who just finished high school, about to go into the army in the gap year program, come to our land at the junction. We're not there now because there's another group there. We couldn't go there because there's another group there with my partners. And some of them meet a Palestinian for the first time. We have groups which we bring together local leaders, religious leaders, and also municipal leaders. And not yet, but we're hoping to someday, actually no, the first one took place yesterday when I was in the US. We had my partner, one of my Israeli partners, speak in a Palestinian school. Actually, in East Jerusalem school in Beit Hanina, the first time that probably they met a settler, a Jewish, Israeli, rabbinical, Zionist settler. And we're hoping more and more to go into Palestinian schools, to continue going to Israeli schools, to bring people together to listen to each other. My experience is when you have a friend on the other side, a close friend on the other side, your worldview begins to change. And you're able to find room in your heart for the other side, the other narrative.